one of the lead authors of the IM K-5 math curriculum. Welcome. If you're joining us now, just go ahead and share where you're coming from in the chat. Very good. Wow. Folks joining us from all over the United States. Good to see you. We are incredibly honored to have researcher and author of Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, Peter Liljedahl, join us for an informative discussion about instructional practices that many of you joining us today have been using in your classrooms to increase student engagement and thinking. We've been listening to IM users ask questions about the alignment between the practices in Peter's book and the vision of the IM classroom. Luckily, we have two brilliant educators on our panel today, Adrienne Baytops-Paul and Kelly Baker, who have each documented their experiences with implementing IM while building thinking classrooms. They're here to share their IM experiences and help you answer your questions. To start our discussion today, we'll now hear from CEO and co-founder of Illustrative Mathematics, Bill McCallum.
Thanks, Dion, and welcome everybody. And it's just amazing to see so many people interested in this webinar and interested in learning about how illustrative mathematics aligns with building thinking classrooms. And I wanted to start out just by setting the stage a little bit about where we come from as an organization, thinking about what classrooms should look like. You know, there are lots of debates in mathematics education about should classrooms be student-centered or teacher-centered. There are people who think the content is really what matters, and if you just explain that clearly enough, everything will work. Our view of the classroom community is captured by the instructional triangle, which of course has been around for a while. We certainly didn't invent it. Deborah Ball and her collaborators have this view of a classroom where all of those things the teachers, the students, and the content are all important. The center is not on any one of them. The center is the classroom itself. And students are talking to each other. That's what those arrows on the left mean. Teachers are interacting with students. Students are interacting with the content. Teachers are interacting with the content. It's the arrows here that are important. This is a complex community where there's lots of interaction going on. And that's what really informs our vision of what we call the IM classroom. The IM classroom is more than just, can we move to the next slide? It is more than just the idea that you have a curriculum. We have written a curriculum, but we think beyond curriculum implementation when we think about the IM classroom. The IM classroom is a classroom where teachers are using IM certified curriculum, and they're also practicing problem-based instruction with that curriculum. The problem-based instructional model is the curriculum was designed with that instructional model in mind. And what I mean by that is what we mean by problem-based instruction is instead of a classroom where the teacher is explaining how to do something and then kids are doing worksheets or something, the order there is inverted. The teachers give students problems to work on that engage them. They monitor that work, see, and you'll hear more about this, I'm sure, later from Peter. But there's a sort of orchestration of productive mathematical discussions going on, and then the teacher synthesizes the learning at the end. In the IM classroom, we are also thinking about the teachers and how we support them in implementation with professional learning and with implementation support. And we're thinking about where does that classroom sit in the school or the district? Is it in the school or district where the leaders understand the instructional model and where they're supporting the systemic changes that are needed? to bring about a change in practice for many of the teachers. And there's also an important aspect where the community, families and communities are engaged with and support their students' learning. And so we are trying to move to, having written this curriculum, we're now trying to move into a phase of our work where we support this whole picture, not all alone, with various partnerships, where we'll be working with partners who provide this sort of complete array of support services around the curriculum. In my mind, often people will ask, someone comes to you and they're talking about their child's school and they're saying, oh, the math is awful, or maybe they're saying it's great, but they say, well, we're using this curriculum. And in my mind, the IM classroom is about more than curriculum. It's about that whole set of wraparound supports and services. Our curriculum is driven, our design is driven by certain beliefs about teaching and learning. And one of those, well, they're all here. I won't go through them all, but teachers, what's very important is that teachers trust that student thinking is happening. They're curious about it. They're listening to it. And that students are making sense of the mathematics. They're not just performing procedures, but they're trying to make sense of it. They're doing that in collaboration with each other. And they're listening and responding to each other's thinking. They're sharing ideas. Language learning in the mathematics classroom, in our view, happens along with the mathematics learning. It's not a separate pull-out activity. Another important driving principle for our curriculum is that playing with ideas comes before formalizing them. Concrete comes before abstract. And terminology is introduced as needed when it becomes clear that you want to have a word for that, rather than having a list of terms that you get students to memorize the definitions of. And most of all, our goal is that in the IM classroom, students know, use, and enjoy mathematics. So let's do some math. We have one of the design features of the curriculum is a fairly well-defined list of what we call instructional routines. And these are routines that are meant to be routines that the students and the teachers learn so that they don't have to do the logistics every time they have an activity. There's a sort of standard routine. And one of those routines in the elementary curriculum is what we call an estimation exploration. And so the idea of the estimation exploration is you ask students to come up with, so in this case, what's the volume of the tiny salt shaker? But the instructions in an estimation exploration in this particular instructional routine are: you should come up with an estimate that's too low. You should come up with an estimate that is just right or about right, and you should come up with an estimate that is too high. And so what I'd like you to do is just spend a few seconds thinking about this, and prepare just one of these, but like label it. So if you're going to give a too low estimate, then say too low, and then give your estimate. And if you're going to say, but don't hit return in the chat yet, because I want everybody to type their estimate in: too low, about right, or too high. No, that's okay. And when we're ready, I'll give you like maybe 10 seconds. I want everybody to hit return all at once, and we'll have a chat explosion. All right, let's just go, because that's what everyone's doing. Yeah, good question. What units? 4 cubic feet, that's a good too high. I love these answers. I have this vision of everybody like they're holding up their hands and they're saying, gee, how wide is it? All right, this is great. I love the variation in units that people are choosing here. And I also, what I like about this activity is the too low and the too high. people, so students and people in this chat are saying, okay, I'm going to really nail too high or too low. So like, 4 cubic feet is too high. And I think that's a really important principle for students to learn about estimation, is that sometimes it's really important to make sure that you have an upper bound. Sometimes it's important to make sure you have a lower bound. It doesn't necessarily always matter how close you are. And so that's an important lesson to learn as students learn about estimation. Anyway, I think that was fun. And now I'm going to pass it on to the panelists. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a lot of fun. You're so right about seeing that upper limit and that lower limit, and the work of the discussion is to see how close we can get, right? And so that was really exciting to see. I do see a lot of questions coming into the chat, and I just want to share that you can use the chat feature to make comments and ask questions directly to our panelists. The Q&A feature, we're going to ask you to use to ask questions about our partners, our products, or professional learning. And also I want to let you know that this event has been made accessible through live American Sign Language and live captioning. And so to gain access to the captions, click on the live transcript icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select show subtitles. And also, if you are a Twitter user, you can tag Illustrate Math and use the hashtags IMXwebinar and Learn with IM to share your enthusiasm with us. All right, so we are not going to make you wait any longer. We have our illustrious panel here. I'm going to introduce them now. Kelly Baker is a public elementary classroom teacher at Mile Tree Elementary School in the Hampton Wilbraham Regional School District in Western Massachusetts. She currently teaches young mathematicians in the illustrative mathematics, using the illustrative mathematics curriculum. This spring, she'll complete a graduate degree in teaching mathematics at Mount Holyoke College, where she focused her research on the implementation of building thinking classrooms principles. Adrienne Baytops-Paul is a former middle school teacher who recently left the classroom after more than 2 decades to share her knowledge of research and best practices and positively impact the learning experiences of math teachers and students. She is currently a math specialist at Unbound Ed, and she is Chief Operating Officer of My Mathematical Mind, a math education consulting firm. Welcome. And we also have Dr. Peter Liljedahl. He's a former high school mathematics teacher and a current professor of mathematics education at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. And okay, so I'm gonna break down the numbers for you. He has authored or co-authored 13 books, 44 book chapters, 53 journal articles, and over 50 conference papers. And his research interests include creativity, insight, discovery in mathematics, teaching and learning, and of course, engaging student thinking. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screens just so we can see everyone's face. And I'm going to start by asking Peter to briefly share with our audience, what is the Building Thinking Classrooms framework?
Thank you, Dion, and welcome everybody. So Building Thinking Classrooms is, I like to say it's a reaction to a reality that I was observing through a unique opportunity that I had almost 20 years ago now. I had this opportunity to spend a lot of time in classrooms, not having to be concerned with the teaching and the attendance and the collecting consent forms and, the cupcake sale and so on and so forth. Just really being allowed to be in the classroom and do what I had always wanted to do, which was pay very close attention to student learning and student activity. And I know we think that we get opportunities to do that every day, but we don't. We are very busy as classroom teachers. And to have this opportunity, and the opportunity for me was that I got to visit 40 different classrooms in 40 different schools. and just sit among the students and be with them and watch them and listen to them and talk to them and try to understand their lived experience as students. And I didn't start out with any sort of particular agenda other than just seizing this opportunity. But it started to become very clear to me that as I was spending time in these classrooms, that a vast majority of the students were not doing any thinking. And this is a problem. Thinking is a necessary precursor to learning. And if students are not thinking, they're not learning. And so I started to wonder what it was that I could do about that. Simultaneously, I was always also noticing that sort of everywhere I went, didn't matter how diverse the setting was, a couple of things were almost always true. One, classrooms look the same. Two, classroom routines look the same. Teacher instruction looked the same. And the realization that these sorts of what I came to call institutionally normative structures of the classroom were pervasive, not just across geography, but through time. And that what has constituted the very fabric of what schooling is and what teaching is has been with us since the dawn of public education. And my question became, if everywhere I go, I see these institutionally normative structures, and everywhere I go, I see students not thinking, could these be connected? And if they are connected, it means we're going to have to break some norms to get students to think. And that became my work. The work was working with over 400 teachers over a 15-year period, conducting thousands and thousands of micro experiments, working in 2-week cycles, try something for 2 weeks, see what we can learn from it, makes minor adjustments, sometimes major adjustments, but the sort of mandate was the same all the time. We're going to break norms, and we're going to see if we can increase student thinking. Can we get more students thinking? Can we get them thinking for longer? And Building Thinking Classrooms is really the book Building Thinking Classrooms, and the idea of Building Thinking Classrooms, a framework, is really just a culmination of all of that work. What were the core classroom routines, practices that we could enact? How could we enact? How could we better group students? How could we better use homework? How could we better answer questions? What are the optimal workspaces? What are the best tasks? What are the best ways? What are the ways that we can get students to think? Always coming from this perspective of how do we break norms? How do we break these institutionally normative structures? And the research showed two things. Number one, the conjecture was right, that the norms were creating spaces where students weren't thinking. Because the minute we started breaking norms, we started seeing student thinking everywhere. And the second thing the research showed was that we weren't so much teaching students to think, we were liberating them to think. They already had it in them. The minute we removed the barriers, those institutionally normative structures that were holding them in this non-thinking, mimicking modality, they had it in them. They had the capabilities. And it was quite illuminating to see that it was the norms that were sort of holding the students back, not the teachers. The teachers were amazing that I was working with, right? But they were stuck within these institutionally normative structures. The only parameters that we worked inside of during all of this work was we're going to work inside the 4 walls of the classroom. We're going to work inside the existing bell schedule. So, but everything else that happens inside of the room, we consider to be within our purview, and what can we do within that space? And that's what Building Thinking Classrooms is. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to that reality. And the reaction has shown that if we break these norms, if we create a different reality for students, thinking is much more possible for them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can see it in the chat. People are really resonating with what you're saying. And thankfully, we have some brilliant educators on the panel, and we're going to bring in Kelly and Adrienne. And I'm going to ask you, what made you realize that there were strong connections between the IM curriculum and the practices within Building Thinking Classrooms? Let's start with Kelly.
I think that initially for me, I noticed early on that illustrative math and building thinking classrooms really shared the same beliefs about teaching and learning. And then when I dug into the resources, I just found that the problem-based curriculum was already composed of rich tasks for my students to think about. So I no longer felt like I needed to seek out those tasks. They were already built into the curriculum. They were structured with quick launches so that I could get my students up and working within 5 minutes before I was wanting to pre-teach something or just thinking that there was something that they needed to know before they were able to go off and work. I love how the curriculum encourages collaboration between peers. It provides frequent opportunities for kids to work in partners. I find that in first grade, the lessons naturally group students into pairs, which BTC suggests as being the optimal size for students to work in grades K-2. They both emphasize the synthesis portion of the lesson. That's really where most of the instruction happens, when we bring our students back together and we really figure out what we're going to focus on and where we're going to highlight their thinking for that particular skill or lesson. BTC suggests some great strategies to effectively consolidate the lessons, which I've used every day when I'm consolidating the tasks that I use with my students. We start from the bottom and present solutions that all groups were able to get to. Both also suggest the use of a gallery walk. It's something that you'll frequently see in the IM curriculum. And I know in BTC, it really emphasizes the idea of the gallery walk, and students should be up and walking and moving around the classroom. I see a connection with the teacher moves that are suggested in the IM lessons. There's usually a section about how to advance student thinking, and the program suggests questions that you can ask students. They're usually questions that will keep the students thinking as opposed to stopping their thinking. You can use them to really move individual groups forward, or just use them as part of the consolidation with the whole group. Last, I noticed that the tasks presented in IM lessons are naturally thin sliced, meaning that the challenge increases slightly from one task to the next. So students are able to keep themselves in that flow and move and persevere as they gain more skills and knowledge throughout the tasks. Really, I just feel that the practices that are mentioned in building thinking classrooms enhance the illustrative math curriculum.
Thank you so much. So many rich things that you had to share there. Adrienne, can you help us out too?
Sure. Prior to discovering BTC, I'd been teaching illustrative mathematics like Kelly for a number of years. And after reading Building Thinking Classrooms in the summer of 2021, the decision to implement the 14 practices with my instruction of IM was a no-brainer, and my colleagues Jody Munier and Brendan Snow and I did just that during the last year of my last year in the classroom. IM and the 14 practices both, as Kelly mentioned, place emphasis and focus on justifying reasoning, collaborative math learning experiences, and categorically placed a high value on math discourse and student thinking. A hallmark of IM's curriculum is the type of comprehension questions that accompany the tasks. And BTC's suggestion for students at the middle school level to work in triads fit hand in hand with IM's directives. For example, rather than a student just having his own strategy for understanding the equation for the constant of proportionality, for example, he would have the advantage of potentially hearing two additional perspectives, right? Thereby engaging in the standards for mathematical practice organically and beautifully. Because of the triad, students would engage in any one or more of the standards for mathematical practice at any given time. So I say all that to say the curriculum embedded opportunities for students to truly experience the standards, and BTC's 14 practices systematically reinforced those opportunities through a shift in the students' approach to learning mathematics. This shift compelled my middle school students to care about what they were learning and brought attention to how they were learning, so the connections were undeniable.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you just brought up the 14 practices, so I'm going to dig deeper into that. Which of the 14 practices would you say and we could start with Peter, has the most impact on teaching practices or student engagement?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's like asking me to pick which of my three children is my favorite.
Right.
It's I'll try to be brief with some of these because I'm going to rattle off a bunch, but I think, of course, for sure, tasks. If we want students to think, we have to give them something to think about, and that comes in the form of a task, right? They have to have something to think about. And this was, I know this sounds obvious, but there is so much math we ask students to do that doesn't inspire them to think. It may inspire them to do, like they're just doing, right? They're little doing machines, but to actually think about it is vital. You have to have a task that inspires thinking. I think the hallmark of building thinking classrooms, the thing that people think about is having students work at vertical whiteboards. And this is not to be underestimated. Like, this is so powerful. Taking something that students normally do sitting down and putting them up vertical on a whiteboard is just transformative. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the one I want to really zero in on right now is that when the students are working vertically, we're better teachers, right? Like, they are more engaged, but we are better teachers. I don't have to wait for that quiz on Friday to see if they understand it. I can see right now if they get it. And now I'm much more able to intervene and leverage my relationship with students and in that sort of in the moment support. I feel like when the students are sitting down working on paper that I'm wearing blindfolds. I just don't have the same access to their thinking, their learning, their understanding as when they're working vertically. So it's sort of, I say that's sort of the sexy practice of building thinking classrooms. It's the one everybody thinks about. I think the one that's most underrated is random groups. And Kelly mentioned random groups. And random groups is just such a powerful engine to building thinking classrooms. The opportunity to have students to talk to each other, and I know that's central to the IM curriculum, but just that opportunity to talk, and coupled with engaging tasks. So often in math classrooms, I've seen teachers want students to talk, but they haven't given them anything worthwhile to talk about. So now we got to orchestrate all this talking. We got to have, these talking points and so on. But the reality is, if the students have something interesting to talk about and someone to talk with, they are going to do a lot of talking. And it's through the talking that the learning is starting to happen, that negotiation, the meaning making. It's just such a powerful, that transition of understanding and so on and so forth. And it's also the one that happens to be the most frightening for teachers because it's the ultimate loss of control. But the random groups is the engine that drives the learning that happens, I think, not just in thinking classrooms, but in any classroom, right? And Kelly pointed out that K-2, that the optimal group size is 2, and then above that, the optimal group size is 3. I would also say that flow and the thin slicing, which has been mentioned, this opportunity for students to have the task evolve with their ability. So that as their ability increases, the task increases in complexity and challenge. So that there is always this perfect balance between the ability of the student and the challenge of the task, which creates a really powerful balance between success and challenge. And it's a space that I'm spending a lot of time observing students and trying to understand better this balance, because it drives intrinsic motivation, growth mindset. It drives that desire for students. It's almost watching them. It just pulls them forward. That balance between success and challenge. They're having success. They want to be challenged, right? Students don't want to be challenged if they're not having success. And coupled with that, knowledge mobility. And again, I think this is an underlying principle inside the IM curriculum. It's the opportunity that I have this saying, the smartest person in the room is the room. We just need to get the knowledge that's in the room moving between students. There's so much knowledge and understanding there. And that mobility of knowledge is facilitated by the fact that the students are in random groups. It's facilitated by the fact that they're standing up. Knowledge moves better when students they're physically more mobile. It's facilitated by the fact that they're curious and they're interested in the tasks that they're doing. It's also facilitated by the teacher who is trying to encourage the students to use the opportunities that are around them. And then there's, smaller things like when and how the tasks are given makes a big difference. I also want to sort of draw attention to the fact that there are these building thinking classroom practices that really promote thinking, but we also have to be careful of the things that detract from the thinking, like our temptation to be too helpful, right? Like the desire to answer every one of their questions, rather than to allow them to live in that space where they don't know yet, where they're still trying to work it out with their peers, where they're holding tentative knowledge. I find that so much more learning happens when the students are holding their knowledge tentatively. They're still questioning, they're still inquiring about it, rather than having it made to be absolute knowledge by us saying, yep, that's right. So our desire to answer questions can really get in the way. And it was interesting. Bill really highlighted something that I think is really understated within thinking classrooms, but it's so true, which is this idea that things need to take on names at the appropriate time. We want to attach names to concepts, not concepts to names. And that having students work within their own register, with their informal language, to try to figure it out is much more powerful. I have this saying that we want to do first, talk second. Right? Let's do the doing. Let's get them playing and working with the task. And then we can start to formalize it, as was mentioned through the gallery walk and through the consolidation. And that's a great opportunity for us to introduce new language and so on and so forth. But I've said too much. I'm going to stop talking. I can't wait to hear what Kelly and Adrienne have to say.
Yeah, you have not said too much, but like you said, it's hard to pick your favorite child, right? So pretty much all 14 practices, we're going to use them. Okay, so for the next part, I'm actually going to combine questions for y'all, Kelly and Adrienne, because I want you to answer this question, but I also want you to share your experience with building thinking classroom in an IM classroom. And so if you can tell us your favorite practices and share your experiences, that would be awesome. And we can start with Adrienne.
All right, well, I agree with everything Peter just said. It is definitely difficult to choose, right? Only thing I'd like to add is that all of the practices in one way or another do invite educators to examine their belief systems and filter out structures that impede the growth or threaten the needs of students. So it's just such a wonderful resource for that reason, and many more, of course. But as far as the practices that I selected, practice 3, which Peter referenced, where students work, shifted student engagement completely, since it so obviously turned the traditional classroom structure on its head. Collaborating in triads worked in tandem with the reasoning requirements of IM because of the discourse that was generated by the question types in the curriculum. And our students were automatically more involved in the launch and the lesson, in practically every aspect of the lessons, because they knew they couldn't hide, they couldn't mimic, and ultimately they learned that every voice had value. So we'd visit every group before the boys moved from one part of the lesson to the next, and ask for reasoning to ensure an understanding of the skill or concept. And then this helped us determine whether students needed that parallel task, or if they could continue along the trajectory of the lesson, or whether they needed an extension task to maintain that flow, which is the crux of practice 9 that Peter mentioned, also how we use hints and extensions. And then lastly, 2 more. Practices 12 and 14 challenged our traditional grading practices. So we made Peter's statement, evaluate what you value, which is the essence of practice 12, a mantra of sorts. We did not grade home learning, right? We used a platform called formative.com to push the home learning out to the boys, as well as the solutions, and to help them if we needed to. But we instead administered daily graded in-class assessments or ICAs, which were 2 to 5 questions in length and provided a window of understanding for both our students and for us. We also graded the boys' unit tests with an exemption system, which allowed them to drop an ICA if it was 79% or below. So their quarter scores would represent what they knew. And as Peter suggests in chapter 14, our students wouldn't be penalized for the temporary state of not knowing once they displayed evidence of growth on our curated unit tests. So I'd say practices 3, 9, 12, and 14 had significant impact on student engagement and our teaching practices. Kelly?
Oh, wait, before
Oh,
you
you
go,
want me to go on and answer the
yes, I want to hear about your experiences in the classroom. I'm going to actually share my screen because you sent us in some lovely images of your class of boys. Wanted to share that.
Yes, we had 65 7th grade boys in our care. So Peter took my word earlier, but my experience with IM and building thinking classrooms together was transformative for real. We attended to deep learning, equity, and detail in our planning in a way that had each student in mind each day. But the greatest impact I really feel was on our students and their relationships with math. Last year, we watched children with shaky confidence in math become wildly invested in their own mathematical abilities as they found joy in learning from a curriculum that invited them in. They found value in working in random groups, and they appreciated different strategies made available to them through the knowledge mobility, which are all key components of the 14 practices. Students were also, in a way that I hadn't really seen before, learning how to learn, right? They'd approach us with their rubrics and say, I know this and this and this. I just need some help on this. And they were able to confidently tell us what they needed. Students who were content forward and resentful of the detracking of pre-algebra that was happening deepened their conceptual understanding of math by becoming active listeners to multiple strategies beyond just the one algorithm they were stuck to. Because of that daily hum of math discourse that has been mentioned a number of times, we listened to students make conceptual connections across lessons and units all year long, to the point where the students were more concerned with what they were learning than their grades. And that was huge. And then lastly, I would just like to say, using IM and the 14 practices made it clear that we must meet the traditional ways of instructing math with new strategies that promote collaborative learning and student autonomy, which is mentioned in the text, both of which foster student agency. And if we do that through an accessible curriculum and belief and patience in our students and the process, all children really can be competent doers of mathematics. And we saw that in our experience.
Yes, and we have actually video of a student sharing his experience from Adrienne's classroom. And this was in December when they just started implementing building thinking classrooms in IM. So take a listen.
Hi, Ray. Can you tell us about the beginning of the year and what you thought about the program and how you've changed or evolved your thinking?
Originally, I was kind of confused with the groups, and it was difficult for me to go from the transition from the type of learning I was doing last year and previous years to now, where I'm working in groups and really using my brain to figure out the really big ideas of problems. And in the beginning, I was kind of like nervous working with my group, and it was hard to work with others and try to keep up, and I was just wanted to like move away and like do my work on my own. But then I realized that working together, people showed me new perspectives that I had never realized before, and I could better understand like what we were doing, the big ideas, and what we were supposed to be doing. Like there wasn't like a fixed thing, like do this and then do this and then do this. We kind of like, it was much broader, and that helped me better understand.
So you feel like your understanding's better. And how about the grades versus the journey? Like what do you think about more now?
Yeah.
I mean, do you still want to do well? I
I
mean,
still
how
want
does it
to
all
do
work?
well, but like when I come into class, I know that we're going to be working and I'm excited to learn. It's learning and not grades now that I realize. And it's not just focused on like grades, quiz. And now I know that if I learn and do the work and try hard in the class and like look at other people's perspectives, I can do well and learn at the same time.
Thank you for sharing, Ray.
Just a few months of thinking in a thinking classroom, and just, you know, a student able to share that is just amazing. Again, yes, wow, I'm seeing the comments, just wow. And I want to bring in Kelly, because this is, you know, we can hear what students have to say at a 7th grade level. But what happens in the primary grades? And so as a 1st grade teacher, Kelly, please enlighten us.
So I really just think many of the same things that Adrienne was already talking about are happening at the 1st grade level as well. They just sound a little bit different when articulated by a 7-year-old than by a 7th grader. The consensus among my colleagues and I really just kind of echoes what Adrienne and Peter had talked about with the FIRST toolkit and how transformative it is for students, specifically forming the random groupings and using the vertical non-permanent surfaces. The random groupings, especially visible, 1st graders will be quick to tell you if they think that you've created the groups before they've actually been able to see them. They've been so successful that I've adopted the practice across all subject areas. So now all throughout the day, they're using random groupings. It not only helps to mobilize the knowledge around the room, but it also helps to mobilize the knowledge from partnership to partnership, because they're changing partners so frequently. If they learn a new strategy or they hear some thinking from a partner one day, they can bring that thinking forward to their next partner the next day. My colleagues and I have also talked about pairing up students from different classes to mobilize knowledge across the entire grade level. So if a strategy is coming up in one classroom, how can we let the students carry that strategy to their friends in a different classroom? It's also increased empathy between my students, which is definitely something that's just starting to develop as 1st graders, but it's nice to see them take on that teaching role, and they really are embracing the opportunity to work together with their peers and to learn together. You'll hear from a few of my students later and how much they appreciate that opportunity. In terms of the vertical non-permanent surfaces, I think for my students, it's the idea of the risk really being eliminated. They can erase. They don't need to go find an eraser. The erasers on their pencils are always gone. So they can just make those changes in the moment, and they're more likely to start that task right away and just dive in. They know that whatever they have can be changed. It can be moved. On top of that, one thing that I don't think has been talked about a lot is personally a practice that I think's transformed the thinking in my classroom is really coaching my students to seek out extensions in problems and to think and wonder about what those extensions may look like. So early on in the year, I started emphasizing the idea of keeping our thinking going. And when you enter a task, what are you wondering? What could you think about? What are you curious about? And I think valuing curiosity and just getting students interested in that idea took off around my classroom. And now sometimes I'll look over at their thinking boards and I will see something that just doesn't quite look like the task that I thought we were working on. And then when I go to consult the students and ask them about it, they'll say, oh, well, we're keeping our thinking going and we started wondering about this. And how incredible for them to be wondering about these things. I feel like that's what we as adult mathematicians do when we enter a task, is we naturally look for patterns. We wonder why we're being asked this. Is there something more? And to see students begin to answer and ask those questions for themselves has just been amazing.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I'm looking at the chat and everyone's really resonating with what you're saying. And the thinking boards, love that. So we're going to get a chance to listen to a couple of 1st graders share their experience. And this was just, I think, last Friday when Kelly was in her classroom and just pulled a few students to the side. So let's listen in.
What do you like, give us space, about getting a random partner?
Well, it feels good to get random partners all the time because it feels so nice.
Why?
Because it so like we can spend time together and enjoy math together and read together, and it's just so fun.
What do you like about getting a new random partner all the time?
I like that we get an opportunity to work with everyone because we're going to be together for many more years.
Great, thanks. Do you like working on the whiteboards on the wall?
I do.
Why?
Because you get to see thinking from two different people and see how you're the same and different.
Do you like working on the whiteboards on the wall?
Yeah.
Why?
Because there's so much space where you can fit thinking, and I love seeing other people's thinking.
Thanks. What do you like?
So just beautiful and amazing. And I don't know how else to describe that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to ask another question, and I see some questions coming in from the chat. And I think this will be a question that everyone wants to know the answer to. So what advice would you give to districts, schools, or educators who are interested in implementing the practices of building thinking classrooms alongside a problem-based curriculum such as IM K-12 Math? And Kelly, can you get us started?
Sure. So I think this is especially important for young students, but I think that it would be equally important for all students, but just not waiting to construct the criteria for success. I think if you make it clear what's valued in your classroom and the students know what's valued and they have a way of articulating what's expected, then it's more successful for them. So naming those behaviors and posting a rubric. I have a rubric posted at each different workstation that the students work on so that they always are following through and checking in with each other to see if they are meeting those success criteria. Also pairing that expected behavior with the IM learning target at the beginning of the lesson. So for example, the lesson that you saw, the learning target had been, let's solve a new type of story problem. And I added, let's ask brave questions to understand each other's representations. So valuing that collaborative work and then figuring out what behaviors we were going to look and listen for to make sure that students were reaching that goal. And then my second piece of advice would just be to start modeling that productive discourse that you're wanting students to transfer to their thinking boards during the whole group activities with IM, such as the warm-up. It's a great opportunity for students to practice respectfully agreeing, disagreeing, eventually adding on, questioning one another's thinking. They really, I have found, need that experience and modeling in the whole group before they're able to transfer those productive conversations to their partnerships and vertical surfaces. So I know in the book, Peter had mentioned that in the early grades, collaboration usually looks more like polite turn taking. And that was definitely for me the case at the beginning of the school year. But using those rubrics and pairing it with the continuous modeling has really brought forth that experience and made it more collaborative as opposed to just two students working parallel.
Awesome. So the research is true. Okay, Adrienne, would you like to add to that?
Yes, please. 3 parts. I'll try to do them quickly. Firstly, on the middle school level, at least in our experience, it was important to attempt to educate the administration. And I'll say this for a couple of reasons. The administration needs to know what to look for during observations, formal and informal, to ensure you are meeting your instructional goals, and also that the students are experiencing math in an effective way. The leadership can't adequately lead you if it doesn't know what it's looking at or looking for. The administration will also need to be able to support you and speak to the parents on your behalf when uncertainty creeps in, right? Because the way the students are going to be learning math when you enact the practices is so foreign to some parents. It will be so powerful for your admin to be able to say to them, your child is learning math in that classroom, and this is how I know, and then speak to the student's experience beyond their test grades or quiz scores. And then once the administration sees the impact on student learning in your classroom, they have the capacity to influence your peers to implement aspects, or at least to, try out some of the aspects of the practices in their own instruction. They can leverage their new understanding about what effective math instruction and math engagement looks like to impact research-based shifts and changes that can provide equitable learning opportunities beyond your classroom, but school-wide. I also would encourage you to educate the parents, because again, they have little to no knowledge about mindset impact or instructional shifts in math, because it's not our generation's experience, right? One thing that I did was make videos once a month, no more than about 2 or 3 minutes long, to share the resources that we were using along our journey in order for parents to educate themselves about the nuances their children were experiencing in our class. And another idea, if I could offer, is to maybe do a simulation. We did a couple of simulations for parents at our school. And I would suggest maybe even doing 3 if you have the time during the year, because of course, as humans we often don't understand something deeply until we experience it for ourselves. And so that's the most important way and most effective way that parents can really understand how powerful an experience their mathers are having in their classroom. And then lastly, educate the students. And Kelly kind of spoke to that a little bit. For us, for 7th graders, they were able to understand what we talked about when we said the research says this about how you should be experiencing math, right? So I would suggest that you help them understand the decisions that you're making regarding building thinking classrooms, as well as how powerful a curriculum, illustrative mathematics, is and why. Educate them through quotes, excerpts, short articles, whatever you need to help them understand that that's the way that they're supposed to be learning math. Educate them on the SMP so they know how math is supposed to look and feel beyond just memorizing an algorithm and then, potentially forgetting it a week later. And even have them write and journal about their experience and in your classroom, so you can polish your implementation of building thinking classrooms as need be.
All right, thank you so much. And there are some questions for Adrienne and Kelly in the chat. If you can get to any of them, that would be awesome. While Peter is sharing with us, what advice do you have for teachers in districts and schools who are implementing BTC?
So I have 2 pieces of advice. The first one is never suspend your professional autonomy. It's when you're integrating something like BTC into something like IM, it's really tempting to just give yourself entirely into the curriculum and then, okay, they finished task 1, we're going to move to task 2. One of the things that's really important is to watch and understand where the learning is for that group of students in that moment. One of the things that happens in a math classrooms is that students operate most of their time on something I call partial understanding. It would be nice that if they get through task number 2, that they'd have full understanding of everything that happened in task number 2. But that's often not the reality for every member of that group. And sometimes the best thing for them to do is to do the next task is just a slight variation on what they just finished. So they have an opportunity to run that partial understanding a little bit more, develop a bit more understanding, and so on and so forth, and to use your professional autonomy in that space. But sometimes the best thing for a group is not to go from activity 2 to activity 3, but to go to activity 2.1 and then 2.2. And really the principles of thin slicing, which is central to building thinking classrooms is built on this idea that slight variations actually promote a lot of strong learning, and it allows students to turn that partial understanding into more structured, more complete understanding. And you need your professional autonomy to do that. And that's true of no matter what programs you're using, no matter what curricula you're using, no matter what pedagogy you're using, is listen and observe to what the students are doing and recognize what might be best next for that group. And that might be different for the group that's next to them. That group may have completed their understanding on task number 2, and they're ready to go to number 3, and so on and so forth. The second thing is, and it ties into what Adrienne said, which is there's this saying, the absolute best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And today is the best time to plant a tree. Today is actually the best time to start trying building thinking classrooms and illustrative mathematics in your classroom. And I know it feels like, oh no, I'm going to wait for the start of the school year. The kids are more pliable. It's easier to start establishing new norms and so on. But the reality is you don't know what you want that to look like yet. Like you may have all these ideas and you've listened to a webinar and read a book and joined a Facebook group and you've browsed documents online and so on and so forth. But the reality is until you run it in your classroom, you don't actually know what you want it to look like. This is a great time of the year to start. The kids are in a playful mood. They're excited because the school year is almost done. Start now, right? It's not going to go perfect. I promise you it's not going to go perfect, but you're going to find your efficiencies. You're going to establish for yourself a really clear picture in your mind of what you want the start of the school year to look like. And then you're ready to go. Otherwise, you're going to have a false start. Right, you're going to start. You're going to run for like a week or two, and then you're going to go, okay, and then you're going to wait until second term or second quarter or after Christmas or something. You're going to have these false starts. This is the time to start.
Such powerful words, and I just want to send a heartfelt thank you to our panelists. I've learned so much listening to you today, and thank you to all of our participants. I believe at one point we had over 1,700 on live with us. So thank you for taking that time out of your day and trusting us to deliver this content to you. If you know me, you know that what's coming next is a quote from Dr. Maya Angelou, and may she rest in peace. And she says, I long, as does every human being, to be at home wherever I find myself. And so as we open up our classrooms to the joy of mathematics, we offer a sense of belonging. This looks like giving students space to think, to ask questions, to wonder, to notice, and to explore ideas that they and their classmates have. All students have mathematical ideas to contribute to the discourse and ultimately to the learning in the classroom. And today's panel, we have shining examples of educators who have built a home for thinking and learning in their classrooms. We also have examples in many of our educators watching this webinar. And I want to commend those of you in the trenches every day providing homes for students who feel safe to bring their whole selves to your districts, schools, and classrooms. Thank you for your commitment to creating a world where all learners know, use, and enjoy mathematics. And this is the second webinar in a series of webinars called the IM Experience. And we're connecting educators to webinars, podcasts, our roadshow, which our first stop was in the Iowa, conferences and events, case studies, and other engaging and interactive resources. Follow our new landing page as we expand on these experiences and build our bank of informative resources. Our goal is to deliver quality experiences to our IM community that inspire, uplift, and encourage all learners to know, use, and enjoy mathematics. As a part of our IM experience, we've developed case studies of 3 very distinct IM districts in Greeley, Colorado, Des Moines, Iowa, and in New Orleans, Louisiana. And they tell their stories of implementation. And you can now access these case studies through our new landing page. It's illustrativemathematics.org/IM-experience, and you can get concrete examples of the IM classroom. Also, if you haven't visited our website in a while, you may have missed a plethora of new free resources and ways to connect with us. You can download our free ebooks, view our on-demand webinars, access our certified blog, get free teaching resources, or schedule a call with our passionate and knowledgeable client services team who are actually on with us now answering your questions live. And we are also going to celebrate our, before we do that, if you can, complete our post-webinar survey. We'd like to hear from you. If you didn't get your questions answered during this live event, we will be answering your questions, continue to ask your questions if you fill out this survey and submit your questions there. So please do that, and also let us know what you think about today. We got some feedback from the last webinar, and we're able to create this one because of the feedback that we heard around IM users also implementing building thinking classrooms. So we do listen to you, and we want to continue that. So let us know what you think in the survey. We cannot continue without a special thanks to our exclusive providers of IM K-12 Math, our IM certified partners, Kendall Hunt, McGraw-Hill, and Imagine Learning. And we're dropping their links in the chat for you to connect with them directly. All right, and want to also thank our senior leadership team, Brandy, Cam, Gail, Liz, Carl, Chris, Kristen, and Bill, who continuously lead our organization to achieve our mission. And special thank you to technical producer and marketing coordinator, Elizabeth Sneed, math client support team, Catherine, Patty, and Ray for facilitating the Q&A and the chat, and our fabulous marketing team, Carrie, Goodness, Raina, Kimmy, and Brandy for your hard work in making this event a reality. And last but certainly not least, thank you to our IM community for joining us today on this webinar and every day as we affirming all students as mathers and engaging them in rigorous grade level mathematics instruction. And don't forget to follow us on social media and add the hashtags IMXwebinar and learn with IM when you share your thoughts on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thank you so much, everyone.